You know what I love? Freedom. But not just as in, girl, I'm a super hacker and can design a hacker-like desktop. I mean, just having the freedom to have things that are simple and just work or are complicated and make people confused just by looking at them. And that's why I love Linux. I'm gonna preface this video by saying that this is intended for those who are already intent on switching to Linux. So I won't do the whole Windows versus Linux thing. That's already been covered enough on the internet. If you're unsure about switching, maybe just watch a bit of the video and see if you're interested. And if you're already using Linux, I don't know, you might still get something out of this. You know, find the video useful or something, or entertaining. If not, just like the video before you bounce, thanks. This is gonna be a more pragmatic Linux guide. I'm not gonna explain the theory and the technical knowledge behind Linux because I feel that honestly discourages people. You don't need to know it if you just want a computer that just works. And if you do, there's lots of videos and articles that already cover it better than I can. At the end of the day, it's all about choice. Also, I'm gonna give you a ton of pointers and tips. However, Linux is just not that complicated. The reason I'm giving you so many is because I want to make sure that I provide a complete base for you to jump off into Linux and find your way through what is seemingly a pitch black path. The reality is, there's lots of streetlights along the way to help you, and you may not even need them depending on how much you want to learn. If you watched my last video, you'll know that I went over my new Linux setup that I made after my gaming laptop essentially just imploded. I highly suggest you watch it after this one since it's relatively short and it provides advice about obtaining cheap hardware too. So now that I've talked about the hardware, well, it's time for the software. This is my experience with Linux and how I would go about switching. Cool? Alright, let's get into it. Look, I don't know what's with this whole view of Linux being hackers hacking the mainframe operating system, because you don't even have to interact with the command line if you don't want to. I'd wager that it can even be simpler than Windows in some ways. The whole thing about Linux being good if you don't value your time is true for maybe the most difficult distros. Most Linux users are using these. These ones are still the image of Linux though. And they're also the ones most looked up to in the Linux community. Similar to that of a difficult video game. Think like Elden Ring or Dark Souls or something like that. They give the user the most power out of the box over the system. Ultimately though, popular distributions like Mint, Fedora, Ubuntu stay out of your way most of the time. Downloading apps is done through a package manager most of the time. A centralized place for apps, and if it isn't, then you can use stuff like Flatpaks, PPA repositories on Ubuntu specifically, and also on Ubuntu, the very controversial snap packages. Look, I didn't really use Ubuntu for a long time, but you know, Flatpaks are great. I use Fedora, and you can get Flatpaks on many different distributions. Great. Distros are built upon each other, and that's why there's so many of them. Ultimately though, the lineage goes back to certain distros that started it all, and Arch Linux is one of them. Another one that we'll mention later is Debian. Arch-based distros also have the Arch User Repository, or the AUR for short. It's a community-driven collection of user-submitted packages, including brand new and niche software not even found in official repositories. Only in rare instances, if ever, would you have to download a Linux package on the internet manually and install it. Even then, this is often done by a package installer app or just by a single install command. You definitely don't have to compile anything or something like that. You know, like the super complicated process of building an entire package or application, unless you want to, or some random obscure app on GitHub requires it. In fact, Flatpaks, app images, and snaps, 3 types of packages on Linux, are often easier than Windows installers. And when you need to do an update on your apps, you can just go into your package manager app store or just type literally 2 lines, one to get the data and one to install it. It's a lot less work to keep things up to date than Windows in my personal opinion. Heck, let me gas it up a little bit more. Hold on, I'm not finished. Linux can be as easy as a Mac, or if you desire, it can be hard for even college graduates. You can build Linux at home if you wanted to, aka Linux from scratch. Am I ever going to do that? I don't know, man. That's kind of a lot to do. And on that note, let's talk about choosing a distro and a desktop. I believe this is made a lot harder for beginners than it needs to be. Here's the simple answer. Choose an easy distro to start off with. You can just look up easy or beginner Linux distros online if you need to. But I'm talking Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Pop! OS. If you're into more Arch-based distros, which is, obviously the faster updating, but a little bit more complicated, you have to stay on top of things. Endeavor OS and Manjaro, oh my gosh, etc. Picking a distro should really boil down to what you need. Stability or the latest, a learning experience, or a computer that works out of the gate. Once you set it up, it'll all be the same for the most part. But in any case, you'll want to pick something easy. These distros give you the most options to learn if you want, but they will stay out of your way if you don't. They work for both striving Linux distro, desktop writers, as well as your average computer user. This is the key thing with Linux. You have the choice to do anything with your system, and you can build it to be much greater or much worse than anything pre-made if you truly want to. And you've probably noticed that I mentioned Arch Linux, and later on I'll mention a bit more Debian, since they are the basis for many popular distributions of Linux. But let me be clear, I do not suggest these for any newcomers coming to these, to Linux in general. These are just the basis for many of these easier and more beginner-friendly distros that you see. The only things I need to consider are 1. Do you have an NVIDIA GPU? 2. How new is your computer? And 3. Whether or not you want fast updates or stability. So to answer number 1, NVIDIA cards are a ginormous headache to deal with on Linux in general. Just look up NVIDIA cards and Linux and you'll understand why. In fact, I spend a lot of time getting my own NVIDIA card to work on my distro. Granted, I'm using Debian, which is a bit higher in the difficulty totem pole, and my GPU is also over a decade old. But still. Some distros like Pop! OS just come with built-in NVIDIA drivers to make your card work, while others like Arch-based ones make it easier to install them. These are my suggestions for people who have NVIDIA cards, although if you're on Linux, the best thing to do would be to just either have an AMD graphics card or to just not have a dedicated graphics card at all. It works well for gaming or for 3D modeling in Blender or something like that set up properly, though Pop! OS does make it easier by bundling the driver out of the box. You definitely don't want to just use the standard built-in no-goo drivers, the ones that are already in the Linux kernel. These are kind of more like a band-aid solution. You definitely want to install those proprietary drivers at some point, unless you're just like the biggest free and open source software enthusiast. But when you're a beginner, sometimes you just have to make concessions for yourself, okay? Don't make it more difficult than it has to. Please don't make the mistakes I did. And that brings me to number 2, the age of your hardware. I personally used Pop! OS for several months on my gaming laptop before I had to move back, mostly due to hardware issues. Because it was just such a new laptop at the time. It was 2020. My laptop is a 2020 model Lenovo Legion 5. The Linux kernel, which is what Linux is built upon, hence the name kernel, think of it like a popcorn kernel. The Linux that you're seeing is the layers, and then the inside is the kernel, which you don't want to bite down on because that makes everything run. Supports a wide range of hardware, but it may sometimes not have the best support out of box for brand spanking new hardware. Give it a bit of time or just choose a distro that updates quicker, something that's rolling release. And smooth transition to number 3, choose whether you want quick updates or stability. Yes, we're going back into this real quick. This is the most important thing besides NVIDIA drivers, but that only applies to a small amount of people with these graphics cards. Everyone, listen up, okay? A distro with faster updates or a rolling release style will provide you with the latest and greatest software and hardware support quickly. For a 1990s car analogy that literally nobody asked for, just imagine a BMW M Series coupe, the E36 M3s. These are rolling release distros. However, it will naturally be more unstable and prone to small issues popping up. Should you let them accumulate or not use your system for a long time, they'll become bigger and harder to deal with. These are more high maintenance, let's just say that. Examples of these are rolling release distributions like the famous and memeable Arch Linux, the whole oh my god guys, I use Arch by the way. As well as its derivatives I mentioned earlier, and OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, which is actually pretty beginner friendly. Manjaro is often recommended as a good Arch-based distro for beginners, has its own stable branch, and it delays Arch updates to ensure better stability, though occasional issues can still occur. It's a bit more complex than Mint, but it's definitely more beginner friendly than something like Pure Arch or Debian or any of those distros that are said to be hard. You don't want to mess with them. A slower releasing distro is going to have less up-to-date stuff. It'll be new enough, just not cutting-edge features and stuff. But it will be less prone to breaking and just be lower maintenance overall. These are the Mazda Miatas. This is distros like Ubuntu long-term support, which is Ubuntu LTS, Mint, Pop! OS, which are Ubuntu Star Kids, and the father of all of these, as well as my distro of choice, Debian. Hold on, let me get the NeoFetch real quick. Look, you already know, you have to flex. Dude, wait a minute. They told me that NeoFetch got, is discontinued now. Look, I'm still using it. I forgot the name of the new, solution everybody's using now. So, it'll be alright, you know what I'm saying? And boom. Yeah. Debian GNU/Linux 12. Somebody please put the GNU/Linux copy pasta in the comments. It's up to you what distro you want to use, but personally, after using Linux infrequently, besides from my brief stint with Pop! OS, and now I'll be using Debian daily, as well as my ThinkPads I have. This is one of them right here. I prefer stability. I may switch to our rolling release distribution since I'm using Linux so frequently in the future, but for what it's worth, my first ever distro was Fedora. Alongside picking a distro, you also have to pick a desktop environment. Now, this just comes down to aesthetics, what you like or need for your use case, and how strong your computer is. The desktop is how you interact with your entire Linux system, barring the command line. There's lots of options like GNOME, KDE, XFCE, Cinnamon, Mate. These acronyms are getting out of hand. Whatever. XFCE is my personal favorite. I highly suggest just taking a look at all of them and researching them online. Then download whatever Linux distro you're desired on a live USB or on a virtual machine, and then just see it for yourself. If you like it, cool, okay, install it onto your machine. You can also download a desktop environment directly from your package manager, so after you've already installed your distro, just be wary of issues popping up since it's being done after the fact rather than being pre-installed into your installation by the distro developers. To actually install a major Linux distro is fairly easy. These typically come with installers, similar to downloading a program on Windows or something like that. There's lots of guides and videos out there that can help you out with this part, but it essentially boils down to, number one, downloading the ISO file from the official website of your chosen Linux distribution. This is the Linux distro itself. Then, number two, you flash the ISO onto a USB drive using a tool like Rufus. So yeah, pull out that I don't know, Skibby Toilet. You know, this is the second time I mentioned Skibby. Does anybody still watch Skibby Toilet? Okay, yeah, so you flash the ISO onto a USB drive using some sort of tool program like Rufus. And three, you got to boot your computer from the USB drive and try out the live environment within the flash drive before you install it onto your computer itself. So essentially it's sandboxing the rest of your computer. You know, you're not gonna delete your entire Windows installer just by putting in the flash drive. No, you try it out on the flash drive itself first, and then it goes onto your computer. And number four, installing the distro using the built-in installer on your computer. And once you know it, you're probably not gonna forget it. It's really, really straightforward. So I want to give you some tips on how to switch, but for me to do that, I feel I have to describe my own experience switching to Linux. Now, if I had chosen the easier distribution, chances are this would have been less problematic. But for my full Linux switch, like me actually committing to it, using it daily, I decided upon Debian. Since it was so stable, worked well on other machines, and I also had a bit of Linux experience before. But my first ever distro that I ever used was Fedora. I used it on a separate machine though, not my main computer. Now, I've used Debian before, but it was on, ThinkPads. Now, here's the problem with this, right? Everybody uses Linux on ThinkPads. You go to r/ThinkPad, you know how many Windows posts you're gonna see on there? Not a ton, not gonna lie. A lot of them are gonna be Linux. It's gonna be very disproportionate. You look on there, if you just gave it to somebody who's never seen the entire internet, you're probably gonna think that 50% of the world uses Linux. In reality, it's 2%. ThinkPads have fantastic support across the board from the Linux kernel. Hell, it's better than Windows. My computer, different story. We're talking about a relatively new monitor combined with an old desktop, and worst of all, an old NVIDIA card. We'll talk more about NVIDIA drivers, yes, even more, later. Now, I got this desktop a year and a half ago. I explained the specs of it in my last video, so I suggest that you watch the setup video if you want the background knowledge for this video. Alright, now we're going to talk about making the switch easy. These are some pointers that I'd stick to if I were you, so that the switch is as easy and smooth as possible. Like I said, this video isn't about the technical details of switching. It's about how you can do it yourself. That's why my first tip is to make use of the internet. This is going to be your best friend. You got to learn how to troubleshoot. Your audio's cut out? Just look up audio not working, distribution name and version. You just have to look up the relevant keywords. Anything that's relevant. It doesn't have to be a complete sentence. Now, what website that you'll need depends on a case-by-case basis, but for anything, the websites that you're definitely going to use are your search engines, so Google or DuckDuckGo in my case, or whatever search engine you use, Stack Overflow, ChatGPT, or any LLM. are going to be your best friends. YouTube videos are also pretty helpful if you need a guide for where exactly to look. They'll show you the graphical user interface, everything that you need. It will be a visual representation. I also frequently use Reddit, but don't use the built-in Reddit search engine. On your search engine of choice, type in whatever with, at the end, site:reddit.com. No spaces. And boom, you'll get pages upon pages of related threads for your topic. Finally, make use of the Arch Wiki. Now, we mentioned Arch Linux before, and to install Arch Linux, typically what you'll use is the Arch Wiki has the best guide. However, the Arch Wiki is also one of the most detailed Linux documentations around. Yeah, it was written with Arch Linux in mind, but much of the info also applies to other distros too. Just be cautious since command syntax and package names might differ. But overall, it's a really good resource. ChatGPT and other LLMs, I'm acting like I'm selling this to you, are especially helpful, as not only can they point you in the direction that you need to go just by talking to it like a person, natural language, rather than robotically typing in random keywords like a search engine. It can create text files that customize your Linux system, generate commands that are tailored for your system and its settings, provide more general advice, or even tell you what programs to download that can fix your exact problem.
I can't believe it. This is the single biggest problem I've had with this computer. I haven't used this computer consistently in almost 2 years because of this issue with the touchpad. And after spending about maybe 25 to 30 minutes of ChatGPT trying to figure out the drivers and getting into config files and stuff like that, I have finally fixed my X220. It is fixed. It is fixed.
I know ChatGPT is a pretty controversial invention in the technology space, but hey, I'm just trying to give you every option in the book to make your switch to Linux easier. ChatGPT can be a bit dangerous if you try to solve a massive problem and it gives you the wrong command or advice on what to change. So just be a bit careful when you use this. It should be more of like a last resort, I'd say. Specify everything carefully in your prompts. It's good advice to be careful running any commands from the internet anyway. My next tip, create a document and log every problem that you solve as well as its solution. For example, if you fix a problem by going into a text file and changing some of the code in there, and your solution may just be copy-pasted from the internet or ChatGPT, document what it is that you solved and what you copy-pasted from the internet, what you used to fix it. It doesn't need to be long, you're not writing a paper or anything. Just make a note that you can understand later if need be. Oh, wait, what's this? What? You've essentially become the GOAT by doing this. Why? Hold on, stick with me. You've essentially created a change log for your software. In this case, your Linux distro. You're documenting your updates, aren't you? Congrats, you're now a pseudo programmer, I think. This allows you to keep track of all fixes that you make. Sometimes you can add a text file that just straight up doesn't work. Or maybe you did something that caused a conflict with another thing that you did earlier. This allows you to keep track of it all. This is also pretty much the same philosophy that Git and GitHub are built upon. So, once again, you are a pseudo programmer. In fact, you may as well be a programmer. Hey, a lot of programming is, at the end of the day, you're kind of just looking stuff up on Stack Overflow or ChatGPT. You didn't hear me say that. This is most helpful for people who are really trying to get deep into Linux and learn everything about it. I wouldn't say it's so helpful for people who just want a working operating system, just a working computer. If you're really getting into the nitty-gritty and customizing everything and, you want to change everything and take advantage of every single opportunity that you have, then yes, this is great. But I say just to stay safe, log any big changes that you change or new things that you add that affects how your system works. I'm talking very big things. If it's something minor, you don't have to write that down. And I'd say for anybody who's just looking to have a computer that works, you don't need to do this. You really don't. If you want to, go ahead. Speaking of reducing mistakes, install Timeshift. This is the most popular Linux backup program that I've heard of, but there are others. It essentially restores your system to an earlier state. Your Linux system can break. You may get reckless and make a mistake, or very rarely a massive bug can just pop up and screw you over. And I may talk about my experiences in a future video doing this, but this is probably something that most people won't run into. Now, this is not to scare you, because if you choose a relatively easy distribution and don't just start messing around with, everything recklessly, you won't have an issue like I did. A pro tip is that if you want to do any risky or crazy stuff, just spin up a virtual machine and do it there. Don't do it on your main Linux distro installed. keep everything sandboxed in a virtual machine. That way you won't have to worry about your entire Linux system just getting nuked. This pretty much goes for a lot of things in Linux and life in general. But, you know, with the amount of freedom that you're given in Linux right out of the gate compared to most things, you have to keep yourself in check. Second to last thing is to make full use of what you got. A lot of times you look at old hardware and think, this is too old. I need something new. I need something powerful. When in reality, we can just take that same hardware and stretch it out with upgrades and new parts, taking it far beyond where it was and almost towards being equal new hardware for our own use purposes. Same thing with Linux. I don't suggest distro hopping if you're deciding you want to use Linux daily. It's fun, but it's also a big time sink. If you want to play around with other distros, just spin up a virtual machine or a live environment on a flash drive. For your own daily distro, don't jump around constantly thinking that you need to upgrade your distro. All distros, after a certain point, just become Linux. Make the most of what you've got with new programs and customization. Focus on learning about how to work Linux itself rather than learning about all the different distros. Because it's going to get you a lot further if you deeply learn how the Linux kernel, how everything in this little sphere works rather than trying to stretch your breath across multiple different distros that at the end of the day all do the same thing. If you're making an actual big jump, say from different bases of distros, so like, you know, you're going from a Debian-based distro to an Arch-based one, or if you're switching from an easy distro to a more difficult one, like say going from Linux Mint to Debian, then it makes much more sense. This one's my personal opinion, but I saved a lot of time and progressed faster this way. After all, I'm talking about fully moving to Linux here, not just playing around with it, you know? And finally, we have to talk about NVIDIA. We have to talk about NVIDIA graphics cards again. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. If you have an NVIDIA card, there could be some issues starting out depending on what distro you use. Pop! OS will be totally okay, but others vary depending on how often they are updated as well as how old your card is. My card, which is a GT 730, is so old that I had to download a separate proprietary driver from the main one. Most of y'all won't have that problem because you are using an old 11-year-old mid-tier GPU like me. If you're using a brand new NVIDIA card, you also could have some issues, and in that case, I would, your best bet is just sticking to something that updates really fast. And then, once your card is like maybe like a year or two old like that, there's a lot of development for it in the Linux kernel, you'll be fine. In terms of other distros that are pretty good NVIDIA cards, Fedora is okay. And distros that update quickly, in other words, rolling release ones like OpenSUSE or Arch-based ones, are also pretty good. Of course, these are prone to breaking in other ways because of their update speed as well. While Pop! OS isn't rolling, it's just all around the best for NVIDIA drivers. The company behind Pop! OS, System76, builds in these NVIDIA drivers. Why? Because they literally make their own computers with NVIDIA cards in them. So they know what they're doing with their distro. And it works pretty darn well. Pop! OS, in terms of the NVIDIA drivers, was for the most part fine, even on my newer computer at the time. If you're building a PC, try to get an AMD card, since these have open source drivers and they work well with the Linux kernel, meaning that you'll have minimal issues. With newer NVIDIA GPUs, slower updating distros like Ubuntu LTS may not immediately support the latest drivers out of the box. But fear not! It just means that you have to do it manually. That's everything with Linux, okay? If it doesn't work, you can still get it to work. You just have to do it yourself. But in this case, it's really not the hardest process in the world. You can still manually install recent proprietary drivers from NVIDIA's website or just from your distro's package manager or by something like, PPAs if you're on Ubuntu. Once again, Pop! OS streamlines this process, making it a better plug-and-play choice. If you ever run into issues, just remember you'll have your friends at the internet and your best friend, ChatGPT, to guide you. There will be plenty of resources that you can find that will help you get out of any hole that you're stuck in. If your question hasn't ever been asked in the entire history of Linux or the internet, then just make a Reddit or Stack Overflow post and someone will try to help you, or talk to any sort of GPT, ChatGPT, LLM, whatever model of AI is your preference. Pick your flavor, just like a distro. And that wraps everything up. This is the how do I pronounce this? Hold on, I need to know how to pronounce this. Exhaustive list of tips that I could think of, and there's many more that I could do. But chances are, with an easier distro and a computer that isn't like a century old, you won't run into a crazy amount of errors or breaking anyway.
All right, well, we've reached the end of the video. I hope that this guide was helpful, and thanks for 2,000 subscribers. Also, thanks if you're still watching this far. I mean, it means a lot. I love y'all, and I'm glad that y'all came for this little drift run of a YouTube channel that's turning out to be. Subscribe and like the video, and check out my second channel and my Blue Sky account. Oh yeah, and I'm also taking donations now. All links are in the description. I feel that my last video may have given off the wrong impression, that like I'm completely new to Linux. The truth is that I'm not. I use Fedora and then Pop! OS daily a few years back. Both of my ThinkPads also run Linux. One having regular Debian, it's over there, and it's really huge, and I don't want to pick it up right now. And the other one, right here, say hi. Say hi. You see, one day in 2050, in 2077, the computers are the ones that are going to be doing the intros and the outros for these videos, not me. Just imagine this little computer doing the talking. Okay, anyway. Yeah, so this one right here runs MX Linux, which is a Debian derivative. I'm pretty happy with it. I'm really happy with the XFCE desktop that comes pre-installed with it. It's a really nice design that the developers put together, and it's really rock solid and stable. It's a good distro overall. But I'm just clarifying for anyone that's wondering. Once again, I definitely would not suggest a beginner to try Debian unless you just like purposefully want to be pissed off. Make sure that you have some fun with Linux, Take advantage of the freedom that it gives you. Don't rush into it and trip over your laces, but don't overanalyze it and get into analysis paralysis, Just take your time and just learn as you go. Make mistakes and get better. And if you don't care about customizing and just want something that works, that's cool as well, because Linux is all about having choice and freedom in what you do. If you like the music in this video, the ones I put in the transitions and stuff, go check out my friend Coffee's channel, aka Coffee2134. He makes some pretty cool drum and bass electronic music from time to time. And, he's my friend. Go check out his channel. Cool? Cool. That's all. Thanks. And don't delete your root folder.